Good morning to those on the call. Thank you for joining today. I would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. Everyone has been muted on entry. Please enter any questions that you have using the Q&A pod. That function is on Zoom. We will have time to address any questions at the end of the webinar. And while we will review our chat, our primary focus during the question and answer portion will be through the Q&A pod. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with a copy of the slides, will be posted online to the CSBG webinars page. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fiscal year 2023 Community Services Block Grant Annual Report webinar series. Today, we are gathered here to discuss preparation for our states that operate a database. My name is Manette Galindo, and I serve as the Policy, Data, and Evaluation Branch Chief here in the Division of Community Assistance in the Office of Community Services, where we administer CSBG. This webinar is specifically to prepare CSBG grant recipients who utilize a database to collect the annual report. We strongly encourage all of our states to attend or play the recording, and we defer to them to extend the invitation to the appropriate contacts and vendors. We recognize that we have some states that have a database that is built in-house and some that rely on an off-the-shelf product designed by a vendor. And due to the kind of mixed bag of what we have available to us, for those that are unable to attend, we will make this available, as Nikki shared earlier. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. Monique Alcantara serves as a management analyst within the Policy, Data, and Evaluation Branch here in the Office of Community Services, and she is the Data Evaluation Specialist covering Regions 4, 6, and 7. Joining Monique is Muska Cameron, who serves as the Research Director with the National Association for State Community Services Program, otherwise known as NASCAS. NASCAS is the award recipient for the Performance Management Alignment Training and Technical Assistance, or PMATA, cooperative agreement as part of the fiscal year 2023 to 2026 cohort of CSBG Training and Technical Assistance Partners. Under this cohort, NASCAS is the CSBG with their successful administration and support of the CSBG network as it pertains to performance management. NASCAS will collaborate with OCS to provide enhanced and targeted training and technical assistance to the CSBG network to improve the administration of CSBG and better document the successes through enhanced data quality, data validity, data equity, data messaging, ultimately with the goal of higher quality CSBG state plans and CSBG annual reports. I will drop a link announcing NASCAS is the award recipient for PMATA in the chat, but without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to your presenters, Ms. Monique Alcantara and Ms. Muska Cameron. Monique?
Thank you, Manette. During today's webinar, again, we'll review the purpose of the webinar, as well as discuss some important definitions. We'll break down the XML and common issues that we've seen during our reviews. We'll then review the revisions of the CSBG annual report since the initial Office of Management and Budget, or OMB clearance. We'll then preview tools available through the vendor portal, and then some final reminders. As Annette mentioned, the purpose of today's webinar is to provide support and updates to CSBG grant recipients to use a statewide database to collect data for the CSBG annual report in lieu of CSBG smart forms. Some of these updates are not new and may look familiar. However, we want to ensure that we go through each update and expectation for the CSBG state office to make updates to their databases. So let's review some common definitions before we get started. OCS views a state database as any databases that is used to collect the CSBG annual report instead of a smart form. This is specific to modules 2 and 4. The databases that we are referring to can be vendor built and designed or off the shelf or they can be state-built in design. The database then exports the data to an XML to upload to OLDC, or the online data collection system, via Grant Solutions. Now you ask, what is an XML? XML is essentially the language or code that translates the data from one system into the system used by the federal office, or OLDC. In short, it is a file that stores data in a way that allows for your data to be transferred from your system to OLDC. And finally, validations are a set of written rules that check the validity or accuracy of each data point. These rules are based on the intent of each data point and prior year review of the data. The smart forms have these validations built directly into them, and we recommend that where possible, you build some into your state database as well, which we'll discuss today. Validations smoothen the quality assurance and federal review, thus reducing the burden to states and grant recipients during the finalization process. The validations file is updated annually and can be found in the vendor portal, which we'll also showcase later. So speaking of process and that finalization, if you join the kickoff webinar, this overview should look familiar to you. And as Kayla noted, as we discuss additional targeted TNTA, there will be dedicated webinars to unpack each of these critical steps. Today's webinar is focused on state database and touches on XML export and OLDC upload, as well as that finalization piece, which is after the federal and quality assurance review, submitting any revisions to OCS based on those comments that you received. So as a general, very high level process, the CSBG lead agency collects the data from CSBG eligible entities and the state within the database. Once submission is complete and is deemed ready by the state to submit to OCS, it's then exported to each CSBG eligible entity into XML. Once the data is exported to the XML is then uploaded into OLDC for each eligible entity into OLDC. And OCS recommends that each CSBG state lead agency creates policies and procedures that build in time for submission, internal review, and revisions prior to submitting to OCS. And again, this is to reduce the burden during the finalization process. It's important to note that the XML for modules 2 and the XML for module 4 are different and must be exported and uploaded separately. In addition, each agency's data must be uploaded separately for each eligible entity for each module. So if you have 4 agencies, then you'll upload 8 XMLs, a module 2 XML, and a module 4 XML for each agency. As a reminder, module 1 is direct data entry into OLDC, and the community level transformations must be attached as a smart form to the module 3 form within OLDC. Some quick key reminders that are relative to the process. As the official recipient of CSBG, only staff from the lead agency may have access to OLDC. Therefore, it's the responsibility of the CSBG lead agency to submit the CSBG annual report to OCS, including uploading the XMLs to OLDC. We are unable to grant access to vendors to OLDC. However, OCS is available to work with the state and or vendor on testing for any updates that, that we discussed today. If you would like to test whether you're updating your database or creating a new one, please contact your data and evaluation specialist. To help you better understand this process, we are going to walk through the components of the XML. OCS believes that knowledge is power, and the more that you understand it, the easier it is to respond to issues that may arise during the quality assurance and federal review. So we are going to quickly walk through those components. As part of OCS efforts to support CSBG grant recipients in the submission of the CSBG annual report, we firmly believe that it's important for you to understand the full process and all of the pieces. We believe that the knowledge strengthens you and builds your ability to administer CSBG, including submitting the CSBG annual report. So we are going to dive into the XML a bit further. This might seem very IT or kind of a little bit outside your depth, but again, we do believe that's important for you to understand the XML. And this is going to be a simplistic overview, but the goal is to explain it in a way that even those who are not the most tech savvy understand it as well. Each XML is divided into essentially 3 sections. The first is the XML name, and this lets OLDC read whether this XML is intended for module 2 or module 4. The next 9 rows are what I refer to as header rows. These may also be referred to as additional fields. These are rows that are specific to the agency and the report and allows OLDC to route the XML correctly. And then lastly, we have the annual report data fields. This is the majority of the XML. These fields correspond directly with the data points identified in the CSBG annual report. Each data point has a specific field name within the XML. An important thing to note is that each field must be in a specific order for OLDC to read them correctly. So common issues that we found in prior years during the report as to why an XML did not upload correctly is because it wasn't named correctly. So in each module, you'll see that the module name is included at the head of the XML. So it's either module 2 or module 4. This is also something that we're checking when we have CSBG and CARES as well. And then we have our header rows. Again, there's some common issues here. So the grantee name is specific to state, and it must match what is in OLDC. As a spoiler alert, this is updated for fiscal year 2023. This year, and that's because this year Grant Solutions team went through a process to update all of the grantee names to match what is in SAM.gov or the System for Award Management. Next, we have the eligible entity, which is specific to the agency and also must match what's in OLDC or in the CSBG eligible entity list. So if you've updated the eligible entity list this year and you updated the name, remember that that update also needs to be made in the XML. We have the OR abbreviation, which is specific to ACF and therefore must always be ACF. We then have the program acronym, which is specific to the grant. And again, when XMLs are failing, this is one of the first things I check. Does it say CSBG or CARES, and should it be CSBG or CARES? And these are the CSBG and CARES acronyms. And then we have the UEI. Again, this is a new data point. It replaces the DUNS number in fiscal year 23, and it must match what is in OLDC or in your CSBG eligible entity list. We then have the report period start date and the report period end date. This has to match the federal fiscal year. So even if you're reporting based on the state fiscal year or the calendar year, these dates must be October 1st through September 30th for the fiscal year that it's covering, and the format must be year, month, date. This is followed by the grant number, which again is specific to state and must be updated annually to the state's grant number for that fiscal year. And then we finally have the sub-grantee, which must always be one. It's just telling OLDC that this is a eligible entity form and not a state form. Then we have a screenshot of the XML. The fields highlighted in blue are specific to the state. The fields highlighted in yellow are specific to the CSBG eligible entity. With the exception of the grant number, these normally do not change from year to year. And again, this information is available in the vendor portal. Another common issues that we see are when we get to the actual annual report data fields. As I noted earlier, each field name is specific and each field must be in a specific order. These can both be found in the XSD and XML files that are also available in the vendor portal. And let's go based on this more later in this webinar. Some final common issues are about special characters. There are 5 characters that cannot be properly read unless they are converted to XML-friendly language. These characters are the less than sign, the more than sign, quotation marks, ampersand, and the apostrophe. We recommend avoiding bullet points, dashes, and hyphens, but the system will still read those characters correctly. For more information on this, please see the link that's on the screen. We'll also share this in the chat. So let's discuss some CSBG annual report revisions. It is important to note that even though we do make updates to the XML on occasion, the updates to the XML are in response to updates that we made to the annual report in response to an OMB clearance. In accordance with the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1995, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, issues approval on the information collection every 3 years. So OCS has to do an information collection every 3 years, regardless of whether or not we are updating the report. OCS proposes those changes, and the public, including the CSBG network, may provide feedback during a public comment period. If the changes are accepted, this may result in changes to the XML field names and the order of those fields. And then additional changes may occur in response to technological advances or improvements. So as of right now, we have version 1 of the OMB annual report, of the OCS annual report or CSBG annual report, which was approved in January 2017. And then we moved to version 2, which was approved in February 2020, and that was for the fiscal year 18 and 19 submissions. And then version 2.1, it was really just adding CARES and disaster to the OMB approval, and that was approved in June of 2021. It is a report that we've used since fiscal year 2020 through currently, or through now fiscal year 2023 annual report. Another important note about revision, the CSBG annual report receives the clearance. So the states with databases should be prepared to revise both the front-facing and the back end, or the XML to align with the OMB approved form. There have been, there's more than 3 revisions, 8 revisions to module 2 and 4 since version 1. So I will briefly walk through these. And again, these should be familiar. These are revisions that have happened since 2016 or since we received that initial approval. So in version 1, we used the standard numbering rather than the FNPI number for each data point. In versions 2 and 2.1, we updated it to the FNPI number, example FNP1A instead of 1. This is not applicable to XML because we didn't collect the first submission of module 4 until after we made these revisions. So your XML should already have been taken into account with these updates. The second revision that we made was to FNPI 3F. In the original version, it was it was 5A and was a subset of 5. That became FNPI 3E and FNPI 3F. So 3F became a standalone data point instead of a subset. And again, it's not applicable to the XML as this revision was made prior to the first submission of module 4. Next, we have a revision to the housing domain. Originally, each outcome asked for the number of households. In versions 2 and 2.1, households was replaced with individuals. And then agencies should be reporting individuals rather than households. And we know that some agencies have made that change and others haven't. That is a policy change. So for households, you should be reporting on individuals. And again, it's not applicable to the XML since this revision was made prior to the first submission of module 4. We then updated numbering for the service section or section B. In version 1, there was no numbering. In versions 2 and 2.1, we updated it to include the service number. So we have service 1A, service 1B, service 1C, etc. And again, not applicable to the XML as this revision was made prior to the first submission of module 4. Revision 5, we updated the education levels. In version 1, 3C included high school graduate and equivalency diploma as 1. In versions 2 and 2.1, we separated high school graduate and equivalency diploma, and we updated the numbering for all following data points. Again, this is not applicable as this revision was made prior to the first submission of module 4. And version 1, for military status, we did not consider individuals 18 and plus who never served in the military. For versions 2 and 2.1, we added never served in the military, and we updated numbering for all following data points. Not applicable as this revision was made prior to the first submission of module 4. So again, not applicable to XML. This is a place where we're seeing some states are still not collecting never served in the military. We do highly recommend making that update if you can. We understand it might not be able to be done for fiscal year 23, but you should be considering some of these revisions for your fiscal year 2024 annual report, especially now that we're in quarter 1 of fiscal year 2024 rather than towards the end. Revision 7 comments. Version 1 allowed for comments directly into the annual report. For versions 2 and 2.1, we removed comments as it was resulting in a lot of failures due to unreadable characters. So that goes back to that slide where I spoke about the special characters. There was no change to the XML. The XML still contains these fields, but comments must be attached as an attachment using the comments template, which we'll talk more about that during the module 2 and 4 webinar. And then we do have revision 8, which is the UEI replace the DUNS number. So version 1 includes the DUNS number. We use the DUNS number as a tracking number. So if there's any change to the eligible entity, whether it was a name change or they merged with another agency or anything like that, we were able to still track the agency from year to year. This is important to the CSBG Performance Management website, as well as just doing reviews in comparison to prior year data. The forward-facing form, as of right now, still shows the DUNS number. We do recommend updating this prior to fiscal year 2024. And then in the XML, the UEI replaced the DUNS number. It allows for 12 characters rather than 9, and this is a required update for fiscal year 2023. So if you need assistance from OCS and or NASCAS in making this update to your XMLs, please reach out to your data and evaluation specialist, and we will set up a meeting with you and or your vendor to walk through this, but it is a required update for fiscal year 23. If your XML is not updated to take the UEI, they will fail. And then we have revision 9, which updated grantee names, which I spoke to earlier. It's not applicable to the versions at all because this is not an OMB update or was not an update to the CSBG annual report. As I mentioned earlier, Grant Solutions did update all the grantee names to match what is in SAM.gov. So we ask that you review the grantee name in the additional fields document, which is available in the vendor portal. That Muska will speak to a little bit later this morning. And also, it is a required update for fiscal year 23, but you should also check this every year. Grant Solutions is able to update the grantee name on an annual basis. They don't normally do that, but you should just check this every year to make sure that it did not update. The requirements for this field haven't changed, just the name of your state may have changed. So next, let's walk through some of these validations. As I noted earlier, the validations are a set of rules, and it verifies that the data was entered correctly. And these are some issues that we've seen year to year. So we want to make sure that you understand these validations. And if possible, you can build them into your state database, or if not, then these are checks that you can do prior to submitting them to OCS or submitting the annual report to OCS. So targeting and year to year, some changes that we made, we're no longer verifying 80 to 120% as errors or warnings. We're no longer verifying 100% human results. And for year to year, validations were updated in fiscal year 2019. So review the validations form in the vendor portal, which Muska will discuss later. We then have auto calculations. The SMART form has fields that are auto calculated for accuracy. We do recommend that you build these auto calculations into the state database. There are quite a few, so I'm going to go through them briefly but quickly, briefly and quickly. So in Module 2, the auto calculations apply to 8.2K, or I won't read all the data points, but the data points that you see on this field. And it auto-calculates the prior fields. So for specific formulas, see the data dictionary in the vendor portal. And then we're going to jump right into the auto-calculations for Module 4, Section A. So Section A, Column 4, or the percentage achieving outcome column. The formula is Column 3, or actual results, divided by Column 1, number of individuals served. So we have our percentage achieving outcome column and its actual results divided by number of individuals served. And then column 5, which is the performance target accuracy, its actual results divided by target. So column 5, performance target accuracy, is column 3 divided by target. We next have Module 4, Section C, individual level characteristics. Each total field should sum up the preceding fields. On the screen, these total fields are highlighted in this pink square. And so, for example, C.1E total should be the total sum of C.1A plus C.1B plus C.1C plus C.1D. And that should equal the total unduplicated number of individuals, or the square that is in blue. And the validation essentially is the total for individual characteristics should equal the unduplicated number of all individuals with the exception of C.3i, C.4a, C.5, C.9, C.7e, and C.81. We are going to walk through each of those in a moment to explain why they don't match to the totals for individuals or Module 4, Section C, data point A. And then we have the same for household level characteristics. Each total field should sum up to the preceding fields. For example, D.9J should be the total of the sum of D.9A through D.9I. I'm not reading each data point, and that should match the households or the total unduplicated number of households. And again, it's the pink field should match to this blue square. There are two exceptions, again, for D.14 and D.15, and we'll walk through those as well. We also want to touch on unknown not reported. This is another common issue that we're seeing where it's not really clear what unknown not reported is. So as I mentioned, the totals for individual characteristics should equal the unduplicated number of all individuals, and the total for household level characteristics should equal the unduplicated number of all individuals. Agencies may not collect characteristics for all individuals and households that receive services, and that therefore should be reported under unknown not reported. But this is not necessarily a data point that's being collected, so it can more so serve as a logical check. So essentially, if you build in the auto calculation to your system as you're entering the data points for each of these, so let's say you entered in, well, first you entered in the total unduplicated number of individuals, and then you have a validation built in for total, and then you entered in all the individuals that served that were between the ages of 0 and 75 plus. Now, when you look at that total, it's not matching the number of individuals, and so you would enter that difference into the unknown not reported. So the unknown not reported for most of these data points does serve as a logic check, and you will probably be entering it after the total, after looking at the total and seeing if it's not matching individuals or households. If it does match, then the total not, the unknown not reported should be 0. So some age verifications and other alignments, we have a few data points that have to align with the individual served within a specific age range. So for Module 4, Section C, Subpart C.2, which is the age, you have to provide the ages of all individuals who receive services, and then you add individuals that did not provide their age under unknown not reported, or the difference between the total and the other individuals that were reported. And then under education levels, we have 2 columns. So we have our ages 14 to 24, which are highlighted in green, and then we have our ages 25 plus, which are highlighted in this magenta color. And the total should for for 14 to 24 should match the total sum of Module 4 C.2C and C.2B. While the total ages for 25 plus should match the sum of Module 4, Section C, Subpart C, 2.E through 2.J. And the unknown not reported for here should again be the difference between the total and those preceding fields. So the blue square should be the total minus A through H, A through G for section for education levels. Moving to disconnected youth, this total should not exceed the number reported between 14 to 17 and 18 to 24. So that sum should not should not exceed that total sum, because not every client that you served will be disconnected youth, but if this number is higher, then we will follow up with you. This should be military status, sorry about that. But again, this is a data point where we're only checking that it matches those individuals served that are 18 and up. So once you enter in 7A, 7B, 7C, if that total does not match C.2D through C.2J, then you should enter the difference into unknown not reported. Again, it's a logic check. That was a duplicate slide. Let me just double check that. Apologies for that. And then we have health insurance sources. So we received a lot of questions about this year. So the health insurance asks, of the individuals served, how many received or how many reported having health insurance? And you can provide the number of individuals that reported, yes, they have health insurance, and then the number of individuals that reported they do not have health insurance. And that's the yellow field and the pink field. And then unknown, again, serves as a logic check to make sure that when you total these three numbers, it equals the total number of individuals served, which is this blue field at the top. And then when you go to Module 4, C.5c, health insurance sources, it's asking of the individuals that reported that they do have health insurance or answered yes, which is this yellow squared, what health insurance did they report having? So the total of health insurance totals, or C.5c.9, should equal yes for C.5b. And again, unknown, not report should be the difference between the total and the preceding fields. For other income source, for D.13, our assumption is that you're first collecting the sources of income that each household reported, and each household should only be reported once. And then again, unknown is of the household served, how many did not report whether, I'm sorry about that, did not report their sources of income. And then for D.14, the other income source, of the households that reported that they do have an other income source, which are these fields that are highlighted in pink on the right, what other income source did they report? So no individual other income source should exceed the sum of D.13b, D.13c, D.13e, and D.13f. This is something that we're seeing. So 13.b might say 20, but then when we look at TANF, it says 45. Or some of those might be 100, and then TANF is 300. So these individual data points cannot exceed what's in D.13. And again, unknown, not reported. This is one place where you might actually be tracking that. So if you collect D.13, but the individual does not report what their other income sources are, then you put it under unknown, not reported. This may be 0 if you're not tracking this information. So this is somewhere where 0 is an allowable response. We're not comparing it back to the total number of households served or to the total number, since 14 can be a duplicate count, as one individual might show up in multiple places. And it's the same with the non-cash benefits. Again, we're asking of the households that reported that they do have non-cash benefits, or these fields are highlighted in magenta on the left-hand side, what non-cash benefits do they report? Again, these data points should not exceed the sum of D.13c, D.13d, D.13f, and D.13h. And unknown, not reported must also not exceed those sums. And again, if you're not tracking it, it should be 0. We're not comparing it back to the total number of households. These validations that I just spoke of, we're not necessarily recommending that you build them in, but we are recommending that this is something that you're checking. If it is an easy validation to build in, please do so. But it is something that we're checking, and we're seeing that we're providing a lot of comments, especially to states that have a state database where it's not built in. Next, I'm going to talk about subsets. We have 2 sets of subsets in Module 4, Section A, 3 of which are auto-calculated, and that means the subdata must equal the parent data, and that's FNPI 2C, 2D, and 5I. And then we also have the not auto-calculated, and here the subdata must not exceed the parent data, and that's FNPI 1H and FNPI 6. So quickly going through those, we have FNPI 2C. The parent row is read-only in the SMART form, and we recommend doing the same in the database. And 2.C1 should not exceed Module 4, Section C.C2A, ages 0 to 5 as well. So there's also that age verification check going back to the characteristics level. And the formula is essentially 2C equals 2C.1 plus 2C.2 plus 2C.3. And this is only applicable to columns 1 through 3. columns 4 and 5 should be using the formula that we discussed earlier for all 3 columns, or for all 3 data points, or 4 data points, I should say. And the same with FMPI 2D, 2D.1. 2D is a read-only, or the parent row is read-only. 2D.1 should not exceed Module 4, Section C, C.2a, ages 0 to 5. Again, there's this data check or age verification that we also do for 2D, since it's specifically asking for ages 0 to 5. And the formula, again, is 2D.1 plus 2D.2 plus 2D.3 equals 2D, and it's only applicable to columns 1 through 3. And then for FMPI 5I, again, the parent row is read-only. We have the age verification for both 5I.1 and 5I.2. For youth ages 14 to 17, it should not exceed the total number of individuals served reported under Module 4 2.C or C.2C. And then for same with the ages 18 plus, it shouldn't exceed the sum of 2.D through 2.J. And the formula here is 5I equals 5I.1 plus 5I.2, and it's applicable to columns 1 through 3. We then have our first subset data that's not auto-calculated. In this case, the parent row is editable, and 1H.1 through 1H.3 do not have to match 1H, but they can't exceed 1H. So 1H is not necessarily equal to the number because a participant who went into a career advancement related program who entered or transitioned to a position that provided increased income or benefit, it could be for another reason that's not listed here. So we're asking for three reasons, but they don't have to match. They just cannot exceed. And again, this validation is applicable to columns 1 through 3. And same for FNPI 6A. The parent row is editable. The validation is that 6A.1, 6A.2, and 6A.3 must not exceed 6A. And this is applicable to columns 1 through 3. And this is because the number of individuals who increase skills, knowledge, and abilities to enable them to work with community action to improve conditions in the community could be for another reason other than the 3 reasons listed here, but these are just the 3 reasons that OCS is focusing on. I know that was a lot. These are recommendations. We're not saying that you have to build every single validation in, but we are saying that you should build what you can and then do manual checks for others prior to submitting to OCS. This goes back to that the state should have a policy and procedures in place that allows you to collect the data and review it prior to submitting it to OCS and giving yourself enough time for that review. And all these resources can be found in the vendor portal. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Muska to talk more about what's available in the vendor portal.
Thanks, Monique.
Okay.
And hello, everybody. It's good to see some familiar names on here. So for those that have already built a state database in the past or are new to the process, you should make yourselves familiar with the NASCAS vendor portal. On the next slide, you will see the login access. It is a password protected page on a NASCAS website. The password is NASCAS vendor 111K, and it is sensitive. So please make sure that you are following the uppercase and lowercase, all of that. We do ask that you do not share the password freely, and that is simply because there are unprotected smart forms on the vendor portal, and we want to ensure that folks aren't getting unnecessary access and then changing those forms because that might impact their submission, right? So only use the password for yourselves if you are a state that relies on a state database to produce your XML. There are some states that drop their data into the unprotected smart forms, which is why they are there for your review. And there are lots of other resources, which include the data dictionary, XML, XSD schema, and I'll talk through every single one of those. So moving on, We have the data dictionary. It is a set of standards for the CSBG annual report, and it defines each of the data elements in the CSBG annual report. It is the most comprehensive guide you will have on building the annual report, though I wouldn't rely on it alone. I would take a look at the data dictionary along with the validations and the smart forms and the OMB forms to get a full picture, but the data dictionary is the most comprehensive single document that will define the data elements in the CSBG annual report. So what do we mean by data definitions? Of course, it just tells you how to build certain data points. What is the minimum accepted value? What is the maximum accepted value? We've seen negative numbers, and there are really no instances where a negative number would be allowable if you follow these data definitions, right? It tells you if it's a narrative data point or if it's a numeric data point, and all of those other pieces you would need in order to understand what that data point is supposed to look like in practice. So please do review the data dictionary. This is not updated every year. We've only updated it, I believe, once or twice, and that's because we periodically review it. There have been some sharp eyes out in the network and from some of the vendors who have pointed out things to us, which we love, because then we get to take a look at that, review, and then we update the data dictionary. So this is not updated every single year, but it is periodically reviewed. And so the current version on the NASCAS vendor portal is what you do want to reference. I do recommend that people, even if you've already built a database a few years back, to still go ahead and take a look at the data dictionary and see if your report is lining up. I've personally been there where I built something a couple years back and maybe I missed something and I don't catch it until a couple years later. So it's always useful to go back and make sure that you're following the basics for how these data elements should be defined. Next up is the validations document. The data dictionary does list some basic validations. The validations Excel documents just provide a little bit more information. And so these documents, it's an Excel for Module 2 and an Excel for Module 4. They simply list the validations that are built in the smart forms, along with some other major validations that are reviewed during the quality assurance review process. And so the ones that are not built into the smart form but are still reviewed are going to be marked in that little bronze or brown color there. And again, you know, the smart form has certain limitations. Sometimes we can't, we have not built validations yet to check from multiple sections across the form, but if you have participated or if you have received a review memo, you're very familiar that we do take a look at a lot of validations, particularly as Monique pointed out, from, you know, checking FNPI ages to the all characteristic ages. And so those are not built into the smart form itself, but they will be listed in these validations documents so you can see how we review those validations. Next up, we have the XML and XSD schema. These are posted every single year for that fiscal year submission. We post them around the time that the smart forms are posted, and we are planning to have the fiscal year 23 smart forms out by the end of this month. So you will see the fiscal year 23 updated XML and XSD schema posted at some point this month as well on the NASCAS vendor portal. The XML schema is, of course, the actual document, the actual file that gets submitted to OLDC, as Monique walked us through earlier. The XSD schema provides information and defines those XML elements. So it tells you what is the name of that element and what type of element it is supposed to be, whether it's a string or a decimal, etc. All of those definitions you might need to create the XML schema. So they will be posted every year as the smart forms are released. Next up, we have the unprotected smart forms. Again, they are unprotected because some states need to be able to drop in their data into the smart forms, and that is how they proceed with their submission. And so they are over there on the vendor portal, which means they can be edited, but I caution against editing any piece of the smart form. Again, they're simply there for those that need to either drop in their data or for vendors to be able to access the backend and the programming so you can understand how the data fields are built in the CSBG annual report on these smart forms. I will say the smart form is probably the go-to in terms of understanding the CSBG annual report. It is the default for how we built the report. So if you have any questions, maybe in the data dictionary or in the validations, and you're not necessarily understanding it from there, you could always reference the smart form and the programming on the back end to be able to figure out how those pieces are built. Again, these are posted every single year as we generate the smart form. So you will see the fiscal year 23 blank unprotected smart forms in the vendor portal at some point this year. And each year that they're released, we recommend checking them out and making sure that there aren't any changes either on the front end or on the back end. The final piece, moving on the vendor portal, is the additional fields document. We do post this each year for that fiscal year specifically, and this is probably the most relevant tool to you on a year-to-year basis because it provides those header rows that Monique discussed earlier. So it tells you what the grantee name is, it tells you what the agency name is, the reporting period, the eligible entity UEI. And so previously we've been putting the eligible entity DUNS number in there. We will be putting it out on the vendor portal for fiscal year 23 onwards with the CSBG eligible entity UEI number instead. And as Monique said earlier, it is very critical that your XMLs contain the specific identifying fields because that is how it is routed in OLDC to identify the XML for that agency. So it needs to match what is in here. And the information for this comes from the master list that the state submits. So sometimes we get requests to generate smart forms for XYZ agency. If NASCAS doesn't see it on this list, we cannot generate until we have the information. So you have to work with OCS to figure out whether that agency is on your master list and what the next steps would be there. But otherwise, this is the list of the expected agencies to have XMLs and smart forms. And with that, that is really it for the documents on the vendor portal. Like I said, we will be aiming to publish the fiscal year 23 XMLs and additional fields this month around the time that the smart forms are released. And then the data dictionary and validations documents are there for your review periodically. I'm going to pass it back over to Monique.
Thank you, Muska. I'll just say one final thing. If you do have questions, you can start putting those in the Q&A chat. But one thing to note that when we were talking through these, this was really specific to changes to the annual report due to an OMB clearance. And so we want to make sure that as a state lead agency that you understand why those changes were made. And this is something that we will do anytime there's an OMB clearance. Any other changes to the report or to an XML wouldn't happen without an OMB clearance. And so we would do webinars like this based around OMB clearances going forward. So you'll always know as far as well in advance as possible. And with that, I will hand it to Nikki to walk us through some final reminders.
Thank you, Monique. I want to highlight the next two webinars. On November 29th, we will have a webinar entirely dedicated to Module 1 of the annual report. And on November 30th, OCS and NASCAS will present the webinar for Modules 2 through 4. I will add the link to the CSBG webinars page for you to register for these and the remaining webinars in the series. You can also access the slides for the ACSI survey webinar held on October 26th and last week's kickoff webinar on the CSBG events page. We have a team available to answer questions and provide guidance throughout the annual reporting process. All assistance requests should be sent to your program specialist. For financial and monitoring questions, send to your financial analyst. Send data collection and performance performance reporting questions to your data and evaluation specialist, please refer to the CSBG or DCA staff contacts page to reach the appropriate staff person. And for questions on the vendor portal or materials covered by NASCAS, please email Tiffany Jarvis, Senior Analyst at NASCAS, and be sure to copy Muska Cameron, Research Director at NASCAS. We will now move on to the question and answer portion of this webinar. Please enter your questions in the Q&A pod. Also, stick around as we will conduct a poll at the end of the question and answer period. Thank you.
We're not seeing any questions in the Q&A pod. We'll give it about 60 more seconds or about a minute. And if we don't see any Q&A, we'll move on to the to the poll. We do want to be mindful of your time, and thank you all for joining. So, Nikki, if you don't see any questions by about 11:56 or Eastern time, then feel free to stop the recording and move to the poll. Okay, Nikki, let's stop the recording and open the poll.